Welcome to Opera Conducting, an Introduction. This video is going to talk about opera conducting and why it is its own genre. And we're going to do this in three major sections. The first part is going to be talking about considering opera conducting. So we're going to talk about what is opera and why is conducting opera unique. It's very different from other types of conducting, and we'll talk about that more in detail. In the second part, we're going to talk about a guide for studying opera. And this is important because you might have a lot of experience in symphonic conducting or in choral conducting, but not necessarily in opera conducting and how to study a multi-act opera. So we're going to talk about such things as working with the source material, the libretto, the vocal score, the full score, and how we intertwine all of those source materials. And then we're going to talk about architectural analysis and how we're going to go from a macro study to a micro study. And through that study, we're going to build a really good and detailed image of an opera and all its various components. Then in the third part, we're going to talk about some fundamentals of opera conducting. There's normal conducting technique. We are not going to get into that right now. We can do that in another section, but this section is going to talk about what you need to know specifically for opera conducting. For example, we're going to talk about hand independence. Now, we work on that with symphonic conducting and choral conducting all the time, but there are specific attributes that each hand has in opera conducting, and we'll talk about where each hand can basically live and operate. Then we're going to talk about centers of gravity. This is something that I have observed and that I've talked about in other classes that I've given. Different centers of gravity for different people and how we can adapt that and our beat pattern to where we are at our fullest and strongest. Then we're going to talk about active versus passive beats. And this is particular in the theater because you might have to go through some material where you're just marking, and see these are going to be passive, as opposed to the active beats where you're inciting the orchestra to come in or to continue playing. And then we're going to talk about trigger words, which is something we don't really need to worry about in other forms of conducting. So in opera conducting, trigger words are key. We'll talk about what that is and why they're important.